On this Tuesday night, the RCMP's top cop on the record. Commissioner Brenda Lucki, in her own words, at the Nova Scotia massacre inquiry.
Things were not flowing the way they ought to have.
The response from some of the victims' families. Healthcare staff crunch.
We don't have the bodies to fill the positions.
The cost of bringing in temps soars to staggering new levels. Canada's hefty hydrogen deal with Germany, and how not all of this fuel is created equal. Plus, the world-renowned Canadian architect raising the roof.
Time has finally come.
With his monumental donation to McGill University.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. The head of the RCMP took the witness stand today to begin her highly anticipated testimony at the inquiry that's examining the 2020 Nova Scotia mass shooting. Brenda Lucki faced many questions, but allegations of political interference dominated the conversation. Questions surrounding whether or not she applied pressure to release information about the gunman's firearms.
It was a question. It wasn't, are the guns going to be mentioned in the media release? It wasn't bigger than what everybody is making it out to. It's becoming very politicized, this whole event, as far as I'm concerned, because it was not nearly as big as you're making it sound.
Commissioner Lucki also faced questions about RCMP communications, internal reviews, and the force's response to the massacre. Callum Smith has our top story tonight.
The whole truth and nothing but the truth.
I affirm.
Thank you.
RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki repeating her denials about political interference, about releasing the types of weapons used. Multiple senior RCMP officials in Nova Scotia have alleged that pressure. Tuesday, she denied it again.
There was never any direction provided, no interference, no political pressure. Was there pressure? Yeah, there was a lot of pressure, most of it coming from the media itself. But as far as what people think happened, it didn't.
Lucki describing Tuesday how many external reviews and recommendations are publicly shared.
Since I got in the chair, one of the things that we've really been focusing on is transparency and accountability.
This as the inquiry learns more about a handful of internal RCMP reviews about the April 2020 killings in Nova Scotia that may have started, but none completed. A variety of reasons heard by Nova Scotia's commanding officer at the time, Lee Bergerman, including this inquiry, lengthy investigations, and capacity. Lucki said Ottawa had capacity to support that. She also said ideally communications personnel from Ottawa could have been on the ground helping in Nova Scotia, but that COVID concerns prevented that.
Things were not flowing the way they ought to have. And it wasn't meeting my expectations, so I wanted to have that conversation.
The force's communication has been under scrutiny due to conflicting information, in part between the Commissioner and Nova Scotia RCMP, including the number of fatalities in early hours. There wasn't much new information Tuesday, Lucki saying she doesn't have much intimate detail about on-the-ground information, but she agreed accurate and timely information is key. But for Scott McLeod, who lost his brother Sean, trust in the inquiry is waning.
Not real high anymore. I come in here with hopes of information coming out, and things being looked at, fixing wrongdoings.
From my client's perspective, really curious and interested in pressing the Commissioner on how change is actually implemented.
Cross-examination continues Wednesday. Callum Smith, Global News, Halifax.
And an update on a story we brought you last week. The Prime Minister says it's unacceptable that a Canadian Forces veteran seeking treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder and a traumatic brain injury was casually offered medical assistance in dying by a Veterans Affairs Canada employee. The Veterans Affairs service agent brought up the issue unprompted in a conversation with the veteran.
It's absolutely unacceptable that this veteran would have been suggested or offered medical assistance in dying. That is not the duty of care that we have towards veterans.
Veterans Affairs Canada is not allowed to offer resources for medically assisted death to soldiers. To healthcare now. Over the last 2.5 years, frontline workers have been leaving the sector in droves. Aging staff and burnout are among the reasons behind a resource crisis that's led to a huge backlog in care. Over the next few weeks, Global News is going to take a deep look at the state of healthcare in this country, and not just the issues facing our emergency rooms, but ways to fix them, according to those who work in the field. We're calling the series Code Blue. Tonight, in Part 1, Jamie Mauracher looks at the impact on both small towns and major city centres.
When a recent case of COVID left Bernie Wood struggling to breathe, she called for help. And while an ambulance was there quickly, the wait to see a doctor would be anything but.
I was told, well, the wait is going to be 16 to 20 hours or longer. And I'm like, oh my God.
Lengthy or even outrageous wait times aren't out of the ordinary at Charlottetown's largest hospital. In rural PEI, the strain has translated to closures of urgent care centers for days or even weeks.
Our issue with this has entirely been related to staffing.
The problem is real all across Canada. In Ashcroft, BC, its continuous emergency room closures have become deadly. For residents there, the closest hospital is about an hour away in Kamloops. And outside Ottawa, the main hospital in Perth, Ontario, has drawn scrutiny for its numerous shutdowns. Hospital CEO Michael Cohen says although the doors are back open, staffing there is still slim.
The number one challenge is just we don't have the bodies to fill the positions.
So agency or outside temporary nursing staff has become the pricey stopgap. Cohen worries the cost isn't feasible for very much longer.
We're very concerned about the fall, but the reality is that agency staffing is not a permanent solution.
Even big city bottom lines are feeling the budget pressures. At Canada's largest research hospital in Toronto, costs from sourcing new staff have skyrocketed.
We've normally seen about $750,000 to $1.1 million annually in agency costs. In the last year, that's about $7 million.
That's an increase of more than 500%. And while unit closures aren't as common in major city centers, there is concern the mass worker exodus on the front lines is putting even more pressure on those who remain, while also eroding patient care and, critically, trust.
Sometimes when there is some personnel missing, it can be up to 6 patients for one nurse. That's very worrisome because this is a specialized care hospital.
At 63, Bernie Wood is worried about aging inside such a strained system.
It's going to get worse and worse.
Unsure about the quality of care she can expect the next time she needs it. Jamie Mauracher, Global News, Toronto.
One move that could help improve the quality of healthcare, Canada's new chief nursing officer was named today for the first time since the position was quietly eliminated by the Conservatives in 2012. The federal government has appointed Lee Chapman to the advisory role. The registered nurse has nearly 20 years of leadership experience, including work in critical care and harm reduction.
I have a deep commitment to health equity and building a healthcare system reflective of all Canadians, especially marginalized and vulnerable populations.
The appointment is for 2 years and it could be extended. While the war in Ukraine continues to loom over all their discussions, a second day of meetings between the Prime Minister and the German Chancellor were focused on forging stronger ties between the two nations and the transition to green energy. This as pressure builds on Canada to help Europe cut its dependence on Russian gas. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson traveled with the two leaders to Newfoundland and Labrador and joins us now. Mercedes.
It's a beautiful summer day here in Stephenville, Newfoundland and Labrador, and most Canadians aren't thinking about winter. But for European leaders who are facing a dire fossil fuel shortage heading into the colder months, they are out looking for fuel supplies for their people to keep the lights on and the trains running, quite literally. Vladimir Putin's weaponization of fossil fuels has brought German Chancellor Olaf Scholz here to Canada to tour with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in search of a far less established fuel source. Hydrogen, the production of which would be driven by the relentless winds here on Newfoundland and Labrador's coast. Hydrogen would provide a clean energy source, one that Germany wants to import, and Trudeau believes Canada is naturally positioned to be a powerhouse for.
Canada has what it takes to be a supplier of clean energy in a net zero world.
You might think an energy deal would be better suited for Alberta's oil sands, but that would be off-brand for two politicians struggling to balance their environmental platforms with pressing energy demands. Despite Alberta's wealth of natural gas, there is no infrastructure on Canada's east coast to ship it to Europe, and senior government sources say there's not much political will to build it either. Canada could ship more natural gas to the U.S., but that's not top of mind for the Trudeau cabinet. The project announced today signals the direction of the government, as does the agreement for Canada to produce hydrogen to ship to Germany across the Atlantic. But much of it is uncertain. Even the permits for this project have not yet been approved, and the agreement is non-binding. Project here in Stephenville won't be ready to ship hydrogen until at least 2025. And even senior officials in the Prime Minister's office say that is ambitious because there's so much infrastructure that has to be built, both to make that hydrogen and to be able to ship it in that transatlantic corridor to countries like Germany. Farah?
Mercedes Stephenson in Stephenville, Newfoundland and Labrador. Thanks, Mercedes. There have been significant investments in hydrogen production in some parts of Canada, but not all hydrogen is equal, at least in the eyes of world markets. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and it holds the promises of becoming a limitless green fuel. As Heather Yurex-West reports, for many would-be customers, the question of which process is used to actually extract it is going to play an important role in choosing suppliers.
With global temperatures and fuel costs rising, the global need for cheap and clean energy sources is unlike anything before. Clean burning hydrogen might just be the fix the world is looking for, and Canada is ready to deal.
So we're beginning to see the hydrogen economy in sort of variety of pilot programs, which are really very exciting. A lot of it centered in the Edmonton industrial region.
Considered a clean fuel because when it burns, hydrogen leaves only water behind. But the fuel can have a carbon footprint depending on how it's produced. Its carbon intensity coded in a system of 9 colors. Green is the cleanest, produced using renewable energy like wind power. Gray, brown, and black hydrogen are the worst, hydrogen made from fossil fuels. Most hydrogen projects being explored and invested in Alberta are coded blue, still produced by fossil fuels like natural gas, but relying on carbon capture and storage systems. European markets want green hydrogen, but those projects don't come cheap.
Green hydrogen is far from being cost competitive, but of course with electricity rates at the level that they're at in Europe, a lot of things start to look more attractive in comparison.
We just have to be realistic about the capacity of these new technologies. So LNG Canada produces around 330 times more energy than this green energy GH2 facility can export.
It's why this deal isn't expected to turn the tide of Europe's energy crisis. Still, environmental groups say Germany is right to demand nothing less than a hydrogen completely green.
The climate impacts of using natural gas to make hydrogen are tremendous. And it's a huge carbon bomb.
That's not to say there isn't interest in exporting Canada's blue hydrogen elsewhere, with Asian markets looking to bring this fuel source their way. Heather Yurex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Threats lingering in the air. Coming up, how Ukraine says it will respond to new attacks from Russia. Competitive soccer returned to war-torn Ukraine today. There were no fans in the stands as players took to the fields for the first time since the Russian invasion. The opening coincides with Ukraine's National Flag Day, a show of defiance against the war. The Premier League season will be played under heavy security in stadiums far from the front lines. But tonight, there are new warnings Russia could intensify its attacks to coincide with Ukraine's Independence Day. The U.S. State Department has told its citizens to leave Ukraine now. As Redmond Shannon reports, President Volodymyr Zelensky says his country will have a powerful response to any Russian escalation.
Flag Day in Ukraine on the eve of Independence Day. But celebrations in Kyiv are banned Wednesday amid high alert of a Russian attack on a day that also marks 6 months of war. The second city of Kharkiv is on a 36-hour lockdown. Following warnings from President Volodymyr Zelensky, the United States has advised its citizens to leave Ukraine as soon as possible. Zelensky said any Russian attack will receive a powerful response. Talk of revenge in Russia too at the memorial for nationalist TV commentator Daria Dugina. Ukraine denies Russian claims it was behind the car bomb that killed her on Saturday. Her father, far-right ideologue Alexander Dugin, says she died in the name of Russian truth and Russian victory. At an international diplomatic conference in Kyiv, Zelensky told world leaders that his country's victory must include taking back Crimea, annexed by Russia 8 years ago.
We can't forget that Putin's invasion of Ukraine really started in 2014.
We should have the humility to acknowledge that not everybody realized the sheer enormity of what was happening at the time.
The West may have regrets about Crimea, but it can't afford regrets about Zaporizhia. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency says he expects a mission to finally be allowed to visit the Russian-controlled nuclear power plant within days. Both sides in the war blame the other for the ongoing shelling being reported there, risking catastrophe at Europe's largest nuclear plant. The city beside it is named Enerhodar, energy's gift. Of course we are worried. How can it not worry us, says this man. It's like sitting on a powder keg. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
All dried up ahead, the stark toll of drought conditions plaguing Earth's northern hemisphere. Over the past few months, we've shared stark images like these, highlighting the severity of droughts and water shortages impacting much of the northern hemisphere. Water bodies like lakes, rivers, and canals are rapidly receding or worse, drying up, creating water shortages. As Eric Sorensen reports, while the immediate conditions are causing worry, in many countries, the future impact is alarming.
In China, there's been so little rain that a 600-year-old statue of Buddha has been uncovered on a dried-up stretch of the Yangtze River. Satellite pictures show Chinese rivers full in April and parched in August. News broadcasts show fire trucks delivering emergency water. Everywhere, crops are withering. China's drought is remarkable, but what's extraordinary is how many intense dry spells are happening around the world. The worst conditions are in East Africa. The UN says as many as 22 million people could face extreme hunger in the months ahead. There was no rain, he says. Whatever we planted did not grow. One factor is the La Niña current persisting for a third year in the eastern Pacific. It contributes to dry conditions as far away as the Horn of Africa, but also across the Pacific, from Chile to Mexico to the southwestern U.S., all enduring exceptionally dry weather.
It's a cause of concern because of all the climate impacts that La Niña has in the form of drought. Climate change is amplifying the impacts of these La Niñas, even though it may not be having a direct impact on the occurrence of La Niña itself.
While Canada has been relatively spared this summer, drought is scorching much of the northern hemisphere. Virtually no European country has escaped extreme and persistent dry conditions. Rivers all over Western Europe have dropped to record low levels. In Serbia, scuttled German ships from the Second World War have been uncovered. While in England, several kilometres of the Thames River is bone dry. Drinking water for some is being delivered.
If you don't have running water, it makes you question all the most basic sort of complexities of life.
But in Eastern Africa, any water would be welcome. Conflict on top of drought has made the situation dire.
The driest season that we have seen in decades. 4 or 5 rainy seasons have just disappeared.
The World Food Program says in this part of the world, people cannot wait for the weather to change. Facing starvation, they need food and water now. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Next, the world-renowned architect gifting his modern wonders to the next generation. One of the world's most celebrated architects, Moshe Safdie, is the mind behind some of the most compelling structures of the modern era. And now he's giving back to his Canadian alma mater in a big way, donating his extensive professional archive to McGill University. And as Dan Spector explains, that includes a key piece of one of Montreal's most fascinating buildings.
It's not every day a piece of architecture stops you in your tracks, leaving you in awe, wondering how someone could possibly imagine it. But that is the power of renowned Israeli-Canadian architect Moshe Safdie and so many of his designs, including the jewel at Singapore's Changi Airport.
An architect is serving society and building for society as a whole,
inclusively, not selectively.
Safdie's iconic works are spread out across the globe and this country. The 84-year-old is responsible for the National Gallery in Ottawa, Toronto Pearson Airport's Terminal 1, Vancouver's Public Library Square, and the Habitat 67 housing complex in Montreal, which actually began as Safdie's undergraduate thesis at McGill University, where he graduated from the architecture school in 1961.
I'd say Habitat is my firstborn and maybe my most radical project.
Now, in a grand gesture to give back to his alma mater and the country that embraced him, Safdie has donated his professional archive to McGill. Comprised of more than 100,000 pieces, it includes sketches, books, models, drawings.
I felt McGill, where I studied, where I became an architect in Canada, that has supported my work and supported me and puts its confidence in me when I was a young man, is the right place to do it.
The flagship piece, Safdie's personal apartment at Habitat 67, which becomes a hub for research, exhibitions, and more.
For us as students, what's interesting is seeing the building, the process that actually went into it, like how was it put together.
Because learning about architecture is about experiencing buildings. You can't just look at photographs, you can't just look at drawings, you have to go and be there.
Safdie's goal with the innovative building was to bring green space and fresh air to the urban environment, an idea he's since applied around the world.
I think the whole idea of sustainability and climate change, I think we're beginning to understand that as we get urbanized, we better not forget how to humanize.
A collection Safdie hopes will inspire students and the general public for generations to come. Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
What a gift to future architects. And that's Global National for Tuesday night. I'm Farah Nasser. On behalf of our whole crew, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is Birds Hill Provincial Park near Winnipeg. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.